UFC and the situation involving, well, the featherweight championship, because Conor McGregor's reign as a two-division champion simultaneously lasted all of 14 days this past Saturday on the UFC Fight Night 101 broadcast in Australia. They said that the word they used was Conor McGregor relinquished the featherweight championship. I wonder really what the definition of relinquish is in Conor McGregor's dictionary, because I don't see Conor McGregor as being the guy who, said, hey, UFC, here you go, take this belt. You can have it back now. I've had it for 14 days.
Yeah, me neither. It's weird because he talks so much. You would think, you would expect that he would say something himself. But, you never know what's in the plan. And God knows, but maybe he says, okay, yes, I give it up. I never lost it, and I want to reclaim it later in life. Although I don't think that he can fight at 145 anymore. I think the weight class is too light for him.
I think the biggest factor of the timing has to do with what is going on with the Canadian event, the pay-per-view UFC 206, December 10th at the Air Canada Centre in Toronto. Daniel Cormier, unfortunately, injured again, and he is going to not be able to defend the light heavyweight championship against Anthony Rumble Johnson. That was the main event, the title fight for UFC 206 in Canada. But now, because of that injury, and that's not the first time for Daniel Cormier this year, and in fact, our pals at MMA Junkie tell us that that's the 33rd main event this year that's been impacted in a negative fashion. The injury bug continues to get morbidly obese at the expense of the mixed martial arts community. But I think the UFC went into a little bit of a panic mode here, boss, and realizing that they didn't have a main event worthy of spending your pay-per-view dollars, and that's not taking anything away from Anthony Pettis or Max Holloway, which is the new feature attraction at UFC 206. That's a terrific fight, but when it comes to selling pay-per-views, well, you have to up the stakes, as it were, and I think the UFC did that by taking, not relinquishing, taking the UFC Featherweight Championship away from Conor McGregor, making Jose Aldo, who is he fighting? Is he not fighting in Brazil? He's now the official UFC Featherweight Champion without lifting a finger. And now the UFC has decreed that Holloway versus Pettis is going to be for the interim featherweight title. Like, that's going to sell extra pay-per-views. I despise the word interim when it comes to combat sports, boss. I think it's about as useless as your appendix. And I think the UFC is trying to pull a fast one on its fan base here by attaching the words interim title. This should be for the number one contendership. I mean, Pettis, with all due respect, at what he did at lightweight, has only won one fight at featherweight. Max Holloway, meanwhile, has won 9 in a row. The fact that this guy hasn't had a title shot yet is ridiculous. So obviously, I'm not a fan of this interim title fight on UFC 206. I want the fight to take place, obviously. If it's the main event, it's the main event. But it's a number one contenders fight, and the words interim title should be stricken from the fighting lexicon.
It's weird, yeah, because if you really think about it, McGregor never lost a title, right? Aldo is suddenly the new champ because he was the interim champ, but now he cannot revenge his loss as well. And I thought the winner between, like you said, Holloway and Pettis, they should fight McGregor. And if Holloway would have won, he would have loved to, revenge his loss against McGregor as well. That is gone now as well. So everything blows up kind of, in the faces of all these fighters.
Yeah, again, the fact that the UFC allowed Conor McGregor to make history at Madison Square Garden at UFC 205, becoming the first fighter inside the octagon to win 2 titles in 2 different weight classes and hold those belts simultaneously again for just 2 weeks, shows the power of Conor McGregor. Now I think the UFC is trying to take some of that power back. And again, without having heard from Conor McGregor, which is a big surprise because, let's face it, he is the mouth that roars in combat sports these days. But the fact that they've taken the belt away. I don't have a problem with that because, let's face it, we've said it before, he's been holding the featherweight division hostage. And what about the optics now? You look at Jose Aldo, dominant champion, one of the best ever, but he was knocked out in 13 seconds by McGregor. So the new UFC featherweight champion is a guy who, well, lost to the guy who just had the title taken away from him in just 13 seconds. And again, to me, interim, I know why it exists in combat sports. If the champion gets injured or there's other emergencies, I just find it's used way too liberally. And in this case, I think it's nothing more than a marketing ploy, and one that I think is going to blow up in the face of the UFC. I mean, Canada used to be the mecca of MMA, and there's still rumblings, and I know a lot of people were hoping that we'd hear the French rap song at Air Canada Centre at UFC 206, marking the return of Georges St-Pierre. As of right now, that is not happening. I mean, the main event is Anthony Pettis versus Max Holloway for the interim featherweight title. We're going to break it down next week and get into the X's and O's and break it down like a boss. But I think, again, boss, I'm not a fan of interim titles. Are you a fan of an interim title? Do you,
no,
as a fighter, do you want this? Here's a belt, but it's not the real belt.
Yeah, no, it makes no sense. It only counts when you have the interim title and then you actually win the real title afterwards. And then you want to defend it as well, right? Everybody, that's what all the other fighters say. You can win a belt, but it's about defending the belt. And can you do that? An interim, it doesn't even pop up in my head. I can understand why they do it, because there's still a title fight, but it's not a real title fight. Yeah, so no, I never could see that. Holloway and Pettis, any of those fighters would be a great fight, though, against Aldo. That's the one thing I do look forward to because they're all great strikers.
What about Daniel Cormier, DC, a friend of the radio show he's been on, and of course, he's just a great guy. He's a huge WWE fan, was at the pay-per-view in Sacramento, California, just the second event at the Golden One Center there in the California State Capitol. But as the light heavyweight champion, this is twice now this year that he's been forced to pull out of a title fight, a rematch against Anthony Rumble Johnson. The first